The studio lights burned bright. Cows. Laughter and applause echoed as the live taping of The View began. It was advertised as a special episode, a conversation on global change featuring Hollywood icon Julia Roberts and Prince Harry. But even as the host smiled and the cameras rolled, something about the air felt wrong. It was too still, too rehearsed, as if the tension was hiding just beneath the surface. Julia sat straight in her chair, her expression calm but unreadable. Unlike her usual bubbly appearances, today she looked focused, almost distant. She wasn't here to charm, she was here for something else. Next to her, Prince Harry answered questions with ease. He spoke about his foundation, about helping veterans, about healing and trauma. His latest book had stirred controversy, and this was his moment to reset the narrative. The audience clapped politely, though not everyone looked convinced. Whoopi leaned forward and asked Julia about her recent work with women's shelters in war zones. Julia nodded and spoke carefully, her voice steady but slow. She mentioned justice, silence, and how celebrity is often used to cover what should be exposed. A few people in the audience exchanged glances. It was a strange answer to a simple question. That's when it happened. The screen behind the panel lit up. Surprise satellite call was announced. Jimmy Kimmel, live from Los Angeles. The crowd cheered. The hosts grinned. It was meant to be fun, light, unexpected. Jimmy appeared on screen, waving. "Hey, Julia," he began with a laugh. "Always a fan, but can we talk about something real for a second?" Julia smiled faintly. "Sure, Jimmy. You've spent a lot of time recently talking about injustice, politics, global corruption," he said, leaning in. "But some people might say, and I'm just asking here, that it's a little rich coming from someone who spent years flying private jets to galas about climate change." A few audience members laughed awkwardly. The hosts didn't. "You talk about truth," he continued. "But what have you risked, really?" The silence was thick. Julia turned her head slowly, her eyes fixed on the screen. "You want to ask about hypocrisy?" she said. Her voice was calm, almost cold. Jimmy smiled, unsure. She leaned forward. "Let's talk about what your producers told me to hide." The room froze. The crowd stopped moving. The panelists looked around, confused. The rector in the booth shouted something, but it didn't go through. For a brief second, the camera feed glitched, a flicker, a buzz of static. Then it came back. Julia stood. No one said a word. She didn't shout. She didn't explain. She simply walked off the stage, leaving behind her mic her questions, and a room full of people trying to understand what had just happened. In the control room, panic set in. One of the assistant producers yelled, "Cut to commercial," but they were already live. Social media erupted. Hashtag Julia Roberts was trending in less than 3 minutes. Theories flew. Did she mean to walk out? It's staged. What was she talking about? Backstage, a young intern noticed something strange. Julia had left behind a small leather notebook on the chair. On the cover, only one word was written: Equinox, and in the far corner of the screen. Prince Harry sat frozen, lips pressed tight, eyes locked on the empty chair next to him. He knew something much bigger had just started. For a few moments after Julia Roberts walked off the set, everything was quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it feels loud. The hosts looked at each other, stunned. Jimmy. Kimmel's satellite feed had already been cut, but the damage was done. Backstage, producers scrambled. The control room buzzed with panic. One director shouted, "Do we go to commercial?" Another yelled, "Find her now." But Julia was gone. She hadn't stormed out. No. She had exited slowly, with the calm of someone who already knew what would happen next. Prince Harry sat still, his face blank. The camera briefly panned to him before cutting away. He didn't say a word, but if anyone had been paying close attention, they would have noticed his hand slowly reaching for the leather notebook Julia had left behind. He pulled it toward him, his fingers tracing the word embossed on the front. Equinox. He didn't open it. Not yet. At the same moment, across the city in a quiet CNN satellite office, an editor named Kayla was watching the show live on a muted screen. She had years of experience spotting when something wasn't right, when a story was more than it seemed. As Julia spoke that final sentence on air, Kayla froze. She hit record, rewound it, watched it again. ... What your producers told me to hide. Something about the way Julia said it felt. Too precise, too personal. And the way the feed glitched right after. That wasn't an accident. That was someone trying to delay a broadcast. But it was too late. Kayla picked up her phone and called her old college friend, mid-level tech at ABC News. Hey, what the hell just happened on The View? A pause. Then the whisper, we're being told not to talk about it. What's equinox? More silence. Then the line went dead. Back at the studio, Harry finally opened the notebook. It wasn't thick. Inside were a few printed documents, a flash drive, and a small folded photo. The photo showed 5 men standing in front of an oil refinery, smiling. 2 were former politicians. 1 was the current CEO of a major defense company. The other? 2. Harry recognized instantly. One of them was a senior producer at The View. The other was Jimmy Kimmel's longtime executive writer. Harry closed the notebook slowly and looked up. Cameras were still rolling. The hosts were trying to recover, cracking jokes and thanking the audience for a passionate discussion. But the audience wasn't laughing. Because the clip of Julia walking off had already gone viral. More than 2.3 million views in under 10 minutes. And now people were starting to ask questions. A trending Twitter thread claimed the word equinox was the name of a black budget program under DHS, something to do with media cooperation and domestic influence. Another post, quickly deleted, said Julia had been in meetings with whistleblowers. 2 weeks before the taping, the center of the chaos, sat Prince Harry, quiet, focused. The photos still in his lap. He had known Julia before the show. He'd spoken with her twice this year. She had told him then that there were things she couldn't say on camera. But she had also told him, when the moment comes, don't speak. Watch. Then act. And now her message was clear. It had begun. Harry stood up. He gave a brief nod to the hosts, politely excused himself, and walked off stage carrying the notebook with him. No one stopped him. No one dared. Far above the studio, a private satellite feed blinked to life in an undisclosed location. On a wall of screens, Julia's final words replayed in a loop. A voice, filtered and calm, said, "We need to move up the timeline." She's already triggered the failsafe. Another voice replied, "Then activate the others. The Equinox protocol has been exposed. It's called and far away. In a safe house on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., a woman wearing dark glasses opened her laptop. A folder labeled Phase 2 began to decrypt. Julia wasn't just walking off a stage. She was setting something unstoppable into motion. A cold rain began to fall in Washington, D.C. as Prince Harry exited the back door of the ABC studio. A black SUV was already waiting, its driver nodding silently. Harry slid into the back seat, gripping the notebook tighter. Inside the notebook, the flash drive was unmarked. The documents were minimal, just enough to raise questions, but not enough to prove anything. Yet Julia's message was clear. Someone had silenced too much for too long, and it was time to make noise. Harry didn't trust many people anymore. But there was one name written in tiny letters on the corner of one document that stood out: Alana DeWitt, a journalist. Independent, relentless, known for exposing military contracts linked to human rights abuses. She had once been blacklisted from 3 networks in the same week. That kind of silence didn't come cheap. He sent a secure message through Signal. No details, just coordinates and 2 words. You ready? Lana responded in under 60 seconds, always. 2 hours later, in a dim apartment above a bakery in Georgetown, Alana studied the files Harry laid out across her table. She didn't speak for 5 full minutes. Finally, she looked up. "This isn't just dirty politics," she whispered. "This is systemic manipulation." Harry nodded. She said Equinox was a cover name, media partnerships, government coordination, shaping narratives. Double quotes ... by burying the truth, Alana finished. "And look at this contracts between Department of Homeland Security and private media consultants. Billions in strategic messaging funds over 8 years. Okay, some of the signers are still in office." Alana clicked on the flash drive. A folder popped open, encrypted videos, internal memos, and one labeled exposure. She played the first clip, a secret recording inside a production meeting. Jimmy Kimmel's voice unmistakable. "We'll toss her a softball, but we need her to stay off Equinox. She's poked too close. She strays, cut the feed." Alana sat back, stunned. "They knew she wouldn't play along," Harry said. "She set them up on purpose. She gave them a chance to let her speak. They refused. So she triggered the fallout." Alana's mind was already working 100 miles per hour. "They'll bury us if this goes public without protection." Harry's jaw tightened. "We don't leak. We release." "How?" He pulled out an old contact list. "Through the people Equinox couldn't buy. The ones who still believe in truth." Meanwhile, inside a glass-towered building in Midtown Manhattan, the producers of The View were in full lockdown. Phones confiscated, external internet access cut. The showrunner, Dennis Rule, paced in silence as legal advisors surrounded him. "They weren't talking about PR damage. We're talking about containment." "She has the notebook," one whispered. "No," Dennis replied. "She gave it away. We tracked her driver. It was Prince Harry's security detail." "Then the prince has it. And if he does," asked another advisor. A long silence. "Then we engage the silent option." Dennis nodded. Far across the Atlantic, in a quiet villa in Provence, France, Julia Roberts stared out across the vineyards. She wasn't hiding, she was waiting. Her phone vibrated with a coded message. "Phase 2 confirmed." Harry delivered, hostile protocol engaged. She didn't flinch. Instead, she opened her laptop. Another folder marked Atlas blinked open. Contained one video file and a single document. A list of names, politicians, executives, media, heads. And one stood out in bold. Senator Raymond Kessler, currently leading the Committee on Digital Information Control. A man who had spent years crafting bills about media accountability and fake news transparency. But Julian knew the truth. He wasn't controlling fake news. He was building it. In Washington, Senator Kessler was already receiving warnings. An assistant rushed in with a printout. "Sir, this just went live on an encrypted peer-to-peer. Net leaked footage from ABC." Kessler scanned the page. His hands didn't shake, but his jaw tensed. "Who has it?" "We think it's coming from inside the U.S., but it's bouncing off foreign servers. Impossible to trace fast enough." Kessler stood slowly. "Then find the source the old-fashioned way. Lean on the networks. Call the Doge and get me Homeland." Now he knew what this meant. Julia hadn't just exposed a scandal. She had started a war. At 3:17 a.m., a dormant Twitter account with one follower suddenly went live. It posted a single sentence. Equinox wasn't a project. It was a weapon. It was retweeted 14,000 times in 5 minutes. Counts began connecting the hashtag Equinox protocol with Julia's walkout. Then the Jimmy Kimmel clip reappeared. The uncut version, someone had the raw feed. Julia's full sentence played clearly now. "You want to talk hypocrisy? Then explain why your network asked me to ignore what's happening in the Equinox files. The silence, the glitch, the exit. Now it all made sense." Alana uploaded the full video cache to a dark web mirror. Within minutes, newsrooms from Berlin to New Delhi began calling. Back at the Georgetown apartment, Harry stood near the window as sirens echoed outside. "They'll come for us," he said quietly. "They already are," Alana answered. But we're not alone anymore. She turned her laptop to him. I've just received a ping from someone named Orchid in Geneva. Says she has the final piece. Julia sent it to her months ago. Harry smiled just barely. She always plays the long game. Now, it wasn't just about exposing one corrupted system. It was about unraveling a web that stretched across continents through institutions and into the very heart of democracy. Julia had lit the fuse, and the world was finally starting to hear the ticking. The morning headlines were different across every continent, but they all carried the same name, Julia Roberts. In London, Hollywood star blows whistle on global disinformation network. In Tokyo, Roberts exposes U.S. media government nexus. The world watches. In D.C., however, the news was quieter, filtered, controlled. On most major networks, it barely earned a headline. But underground channels were roaring. Podcasts, Substacks, anonymous YouTube accounts. Suddenly, the words Equinox Protocol were everywhere, whispered in code, shouted in anger, decoded by analysts who had been waiting years for proof. Julia hadn't disappeared. She had detonated the first truth bomb, and now the aftershocks were rippling fast. Inside a private conference room beneath Capitol Hill, Senator Raymond Kessler wasn't yelling. He didn't have to. The room was packed with Homeland Security officials, intelligence contractors, and private media executives, all handpicked over years of quiet grooming. They called themselves the Horizon Council. Only a few knew the name Equinox. Only two. Understood it was collapsing. She's forced our hand, Kessler said. We can't stop the files anymore. They're out. But we can bury the messengers. Someone slid a folder across the table. Inside were pictures, Prince Harry, Alana DeWitt, and a woman they didn't recognize. A voice from the back spoke. That's Orchid. Real name, Dr. Leanne Moreau. Swiss citizen, former UN psychological warfare advisor. She went off-grid in 2021. Roberts must have contacted her during Cannes. Kessler nodded slowly. Then we have three targets. A general leaned forward. You're suggesting sanctioned operation? I'm suggesting discretion. Kessler replied, no guns, just silence. Discredit, divide, drown the truth in noise. The Horizon Council moved as one. In Geneva, Orchid knew the walls were closing. She had activated a secure satellite uplink and encrypted her data across 5 separate server farms: Iceland, Argentina, Taiwan, Australia, and Nairobi. Still, she knew. Time was short. The final document Julia had sent her was dangerous. Not because of what it said, but because of who had signed it. A contract labeled Echo Bill 12F, dated 3 years ago, bore 3 names: Senator Raymond, Kessler, Major Elise Brandt, U.S. Cyber Command, Dennis Rule, ABC Media Group. It wasn't just media manipulation. It was weaponized narrative construction designed for use both abroad and at home. The U.S. had quietly tested psychological influence campaigns on its own people, via reality TV, late-night comedy, even talk shows. Kimmel wasn't the architect. He was the pawn. And Julia had walked out not just to expose him, but to bait the council into reacting. Orchid smiled. They'd taken the bait. Meanwhile, in a safe house outside Baltimore, Prince Harry paced the floor, watching as Alana DeWitt live-streamed on a secure server to 12 million viewers across mirrored platforms. Her words were careful, clear. No, this isn't conspiracy. It's collusion. Real, traceable, provable collusion. Equinox Protocol was not just a communications strategy. It was an experiment. They used emotional mapping, behavioral nudges, and false opposition to keep Americans arguing while quietly rewriting how truth is defined. She paused. Julia Roberts didn't break down on air. She broke through. And now others are following. At that moment, a second flash drive. Went live, posted by an anonymous user in Spain. Then another in Poland. Julia had seeded copies around the world. The plan was working, but danger was catching up. That same hour, Jimmy Kimmel sat alone in his dressing room. He hadn't spoken publicly since the interview. He'd received a gag order from ABC's legal team. But worse than the silence was the guilt. He hadn't meant to trap Julia. He had just followed the script. A manila envelope had been left on his desk the night before the show, labeled Segment C approved. Inside were pre-written questions, phrased to sound playful but pointed. He had read them, chuckled, even added a line of his own. When Julia turned, when she said those words, "Let's talk about what your producers told me to hide." Rain was falling hard in Geneva when Julia Roberts stepped out of the private plane. No cameras, no press. Just a quiet black SUV waiting beside the runway. Inside it, Dr. Leanne Moreau, Orchid. "Do you trust me?" Orchid asked as Julia slid into the back seat. "I have to," Julia replied. There's no one left to trust. The car pulled away into the night, disappearing into the shadows of the Swiss Alps. They weren't heading to a studio. They were going underground, both literally and politically. Beneath a converted Cold War bunker, Orchid had built something extraordinary. A secure data broadcasting facility powered by solar backups and shielded against digital interference. It was known as the Vault. Everything was ready. The documents were verified. The voices were aligned. The world was listening. Meanwhile, chaos had begun in Washington. A leaked internal memo from ABC had surfaced on an independent journalist's platform. It detailed years of scripted guest clashes orchestrated not for entertainment, but for distraction. Julia's walk-off wasn't unprofessional. It was intentional resistance. Senator Kessler, now fully exposed in the Echo. Bill Contract ordered a digital lockdown. All major news platforms issued denials. Push counter-narratives. Flood social media with celebrity gossip. If this spreads, the Hill burns. It was too late. Inside the White House, the chief of staff received a chilling call from the German ambassador. "Your actress has told the truth," he said. The rest of the files confirm this. If Equinox was used to alter public behavior during NATO negotiations, our alliance will fracture. Key hung up before she could respond. Kay in New York, Jimmy Kimmel sat in a one-room safe house, watching the world react to a truth he hadn't meant to hide, but had helped deliver. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. A knock at the door startled him. It wasn't Orchid, or Harry, or Alana. It was Sarah Haynes from The View. She stepped inside, soaked in rain, eyes locked on his. I was in the studio that day," she said. "I knew something was off. I felt it in the script." "You knew?" Jimmy asked. "I didn't understand it," she replied. "But I knew we were being used. I just didn't know by who." He looked down at his hands. "Julia knew all along," he said. "She didn't walk out because she was angry. She walked out because she had no choice." Sarah's voice hardened. "Then we do too. We either stay silent or we join her." In Geneva, final preparations were underway. The Vault signal would go live in every time zone at once, fed into mirrored satellite streams. Translated in 32 languages and backed by copies stored across the decentralized internet. Julia Roberts would not be speaking as an actress. She would be speaking as a witness. Prince Harry would join her from an undisclosed location in Scandinavia, while Alana DeWitt monitored the data leaks from Toronto. A message popped up on Orchid's screen. Go time 11 o'clock UTC. May truth survive the storm. Julia stood in front of the camera. No makeup, no lighting tricks. It's just the document in her hand. The original Echo Bill contract. She took a breath and began, "I am Julia Roberts. Do you know me as an actor? But today, I'm here as a citizen. For the past 2 years, I've been investigating a psychological influence operation authorized by powerful people inside The U.S. government and its media networks. They called it Equinox. You weren't supposed to know that name, but you felt it. Every time you turned on the news and saw rage instead of reason. Every time comedy was used to hide cruelty. Every time real issues were replaced by fake fights, false stories, and empty noise, that was Equinox at work. And it wasn't random. It was tested, engineered, weaponized. The people behind it wanted to control. Not just what you saw, but what you believed was real. They used actors, like me. They used hosts like Jimmy. They used scripted conversations, audience plants, algorithms, and fear. And now they've been caught. The screen cut to Orchid, who showed the contract, signed, dated, verified. Then Prince Harry appeared. His voice was steady. They used my pain, my story. My family, not to tell the truth, but to twist it. I was told it was for healing, but it was for headlines. Finally, Alana DeWitt appeared. Now, it's over. The documents you'll see today are not rumors. They're real. They prove that your fears were planted. Your divisions were designed, and your choices were never truly free. The world went still. Across millions of screens in schools, offices, homes, people stopped scrolling, stopped laughing, they listened. And in dark rooms behind closed doors, powerful men panicked. Kessler threw a phone across the room. Shut it down. It's decentralized. An aide yelled. It's too late. Across the globe, governments called emergency meetings. Allies demanded answers. Former insiders offered testimonies. The echo chamber that once kept the world distracted shattered, and Julia. She stepped away from the camera, calm as ever. What happens now? Orchid asked. Julia smiled faintly. We just told the truth. The rest is up to them. Outside the bunker, the storm had stopped. A faint sunrise lit the snowy peaks. And for the first time in years, the world felt quiet, not from silence, but from clarity. Global reaction was instant. News anchors who once dismissed celebrity outbursts now whispered phrases like media manipulation, state-sponsored narratives, and psychological influence programs. Governments demanded briefings. Social media was on fire, not with gossip, but with questions. Project Equinox trended in 82 countries within the first hour. Back in the Geneva bunker, Julia Roberts sat with her hands folded. Her voice had shaken the world, but her face was calm. Orchid monitored the feeds, watching public sentiment flip like a switch. France has launched an inquiry into the NATO deal, Orchid said. Germany's chancellor just called it a deliberate betrayal of public trust. Julia nodded, but her eyes didn't leave the screen. She was watching someone. Prince Harry. He was still live, answering questions through a secure channel. His voice was low, focused. The pain I shared wasn't for profit, he said. But the way it was used, yes, that was exploitation. And I won't protect the people behind it anymore. He paused. Then he said something no one expected. My brother warned me. My father begged me to stop, but I couldn't because I knew they were trapped too, just in a different kind of prison. The stream shook again, not with anger, but with truth. Julia whispered, they won't let us get to part 2. Orchid looked over. What's part 2? Julia pulled out the final file, the one no one had seen yet. It was labeled Operation Morning Glass. So in Washington, Senator Kessler was losing control. His staff had gone quiet. His encrypted phone was pinging nonstop. The CIA director had called, so had the head of the FCC. They didn't ask questions. They gave orders, erase what you can. Delete internal chains. Even Morning Glass gets out. He didn't finish the sentence, 'cause he knew what it meant. Morning Glass wasn't about media. It was about memory. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel reappeared in public for the first time since Julia's walk-off. He sat for an exclusive one-on-one interview with an independent reporter, not a major network. The reporter asked only one question. Why did you stay silent? Jimmy didn't blink because I was scared. because I was told it was just satire, just entertainment. He leaned forward. But when I asked Julia off camera, "What are you doing?" she looked at me like I was a stranger. And that's when I knew we weren't joking anymore. The reporter asked, "Do you believe in morning glass?" Jimmy hesitated, then nodded. "I saw a document once, buried deep in a studio server. It was an outline for a media sequence, except it was dated before the events happened. The scripts were written, like someone had already planned how we'd react to tragedies. Before they occurred, Orchid decoded the Morning Glass file line by line. It was unlike anything else they'd leaked. It wasn't just contracts or emails. What's a calendar? Marked by dates, keywords, public reactions, even suicide spikes and protest maps. The file wasn't just tracking behavior, it was predicting it, care and worse, influencing it. There were sections labeled trigger events, emotion threshold algorithms. Recovery phase scripts. The file detailed how celebrities, media stories, even major Hollywood films had been programmed to soften or steer public rage. After certain controversial policies passed, war bills, surveillance acts, deregulation, everything had a distraction window. Julia couldn't stop staring at one entry. March 23, 2022. Prince Harry interview post-Geneva Arms Protocol signing. That date was circled 3 times. Julia asked softly, "Was Harry used as cover for an arms deal?" Orchid nodded. "Yes. That's why his memoir tour was scheduled exactly then." The media spike buried the Geneva documents. "And I promoted that interview," Julia whispered. "I was part of the misdirection." "Not by choice," Orchid said. "Now, by choice, you're stopping it." They knew what had to be done. Morning Glass had to be made public, fully, raw, with no edits, even if it shocked the world again. Even if it ruined more names. Even if it broke trust completely. That night, Julia sent one final message. Not to the world, to Meghan Markle. No one knew if they had stayed in touch. Rumors said otherwise. But the message was short. "You were right. It wasn't the crown. It was the camera. Forgive me, Jay." There was no reply. They stared at the screen in silence. The file's title was strange, unlike the clean, cold names before it. This one felt personal. Red Chamber Protocol, 1996, revived. Julia frowned. "What? That's before Morning Glass, before any of this." Orchid tapped the screen. "No, this isn't just about distraction or media control. This was the seed." The document opened slowly, layer by layer, encrypted like something no one was ever supposed to see again. Each page loaded with ghostly speed, like an ancient system waking from a coma. At first glance, it was a communication log. Not from the US or Europe, but from Beijing, stated March 1996. It wasn't military or economic. It was psychological. "Red Chamber was never a room," Orchid whispered. "It was a theory." Julia leaned forward. "Explain." Orchid translated, softly as she read. The idea was simple. If you cannot control a country, control its dreams, the stories they tell, the emotions they repeat. Julia's breath caught. Control their imagination. Yes. In 1996, a think tank tied to the Chinese Ministry of State Security developed a proposal to study Western celebrity worship, use film structures as emotional blueprints, and experiment with long-term cultural sedation. Julia shook her head. Sedation. Orchid clicked another tab. Now came the pages they weren't ready for. The next section listed 74 names. Actors, writers, comedians, talk show hosts. All Western, all marked as test points. Some were famous, others never made it far. But one name was highlighted more than any other. Jimmy Kimmel. Julia gasped. "No, he was in college back then." "Yes," Orchid said. "That's when it started." Red Chamber wasn't about controlling. The media already in power. It was about choosing who would eventually get there. Julia froze. Her mind raced back, old interviews, sudden rises in popularity, shows that failed for no reason, others that seemed protected. This was an influence, she said. 'Twas grooming. Across the world, the file's impact shattered. Whatever illusions were left. Governments called emergency sessions. Cultural institutions scrambled to audit their archives. Old scripts were studied like crime scenes. And millions of people, everyday people, stopped mid-scroll to ask themselves a single, haunting question. What did I believe that was never real? In London, Prince Harry stood before the press again. This time, no safe zone. Number, stage lights, just truth. He spoke clearly. The institutions I was born into were not built to protect people. They were built to protect systems. I can't undo the damage. But I can refuse to be a tool of it again. In Los Angeles, Jimmy Kimmel uploaded a 2-minute video. It wasn't polished. It wasn't scripted. He looked directly at the camera, eyes tired. I don't know where the choices ended and the programming began. But I do know this. When Julia said what she said on live TV, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Panic. Not fear for my job, but fear that I had forgotten how to tell the truth. He ended with a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I made lies look like jokes. The screen went black. Back in Geneva, Julia stared out a reinforced window. Snow had begun to fall, soft, quiet, like the world trying to forgive itself. Orchid joined her, holding a printed sheet, the final lines of the Red Chamber Protocol. It read, "You may not silence the people, but you can surround them with so much noise they forget what silence sounds like." Julia said nothing for a moment. Then, I think we reminded them. Orchid nodded. You did. Suddenly, her phone vibrated. It was a message. From Megan. Julia opened it. A voice note played just 6 seconds long, but what she heard made her eyes fill with tears. Megan said now they'll finally listen to the women in the back row. By midnight, #RedChamberTruth had replaced Morning Glass as the top global trend. But this time the reaction was different. Less chaos, more clarity. Journalists, former intelligence officers, even artists came forward with matching stories. They spoke of strange contracts, sudden silences, patterns in success that weren't earned but allocated. People didn't riot. They reflected. Because the truth, when shown plainly, doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it sets boundaries on fire. Julia gave one last interview. It's not to CNN, not to BBC, to a high school media club in South Africa. That had requested it months ago. She said, you don't have to fight the system head on. Just show people what it is. Trust them. The minute they see it, they begin to choose. Then I became a mirror. And now, maybe I get to be a person again. 7 days after the final file leaked, a new global summit was announced. Not by the UN, but by a collective of journalists, educators, and independent technologists. They called it the Listening Table. No politicians, no red carpets. Just open records and shared knowledge. Julia wasn't invited. Say, she asked not to. Be. But she watched it live, smiling, finally. Because it wasn't her story anymore. It belonged to everyone now. And somewhere on a secure drive behind glass and steel, Orchid saved one last document. Not a leak, not a protocol. Just a title. The truth will trend, but only if you press send. Julia whispered, send it.